Security. We have a trespasser in the VIP section who refuses to leave. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble foyer of Meridian Country Club as Marcus Thompson adjusted his platinum cufflinks and checked his Patek Philippe watch. 7:30 sharp. The annual charity gala invitation in his breast pocket bore the club president's personal signature, yet something in the staff's eyes as he approached told him this evening wouldn't unfold as planned. At 45, Marcus had learned to read rooms faster than most people read books. 23 years of building Thompson Industries from a single construction crew to a $2.8 billion empire had taught him that preparation met opportunity in the most unexpected places. Tonight felt like one of those places. "Good evening," he said to the young woman behind the reception desk, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of boardrooms and bank meetings. "Marcus Thompson. I believe I'm on your VIP list for this evening." The receptionist. Her nameplate read. Jennifer looked up from her computer screen with poorly concealed surprise. Her eyes traveled from his handmade Italian shoes to his custom Savile Row tuxedo, lingering on his dark skin as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She hesitated, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Could you spell that last name for me? Thompson." Marcus smiled patiently, though he noticed how her question echoed differently than it had for the white gentleman who'd checked in moments before. That man had simply stated, Pemberton and Jennifer had immediately handed him his VIP badge and champagne voucher. "I'm not seeing you on our list, sir." Jennifer's voice carried an apologetic tone that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you perhaps here with one of our members?" Sometimes guests get confused about which entrance to use. The word confused hung in the air like expensive cologne, overpowering and unwelcome. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew the heavy cardstock invitation, its gold embossing catching the light. "Perhaps this will clarify things." Jennifer examined the invitation as if it were evidence in a crime scene, turning it over twice before calling out. "Victoria. Could you come here for a moment?" A woman in her late 30s approached from the dining room, her blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon that matched her expression. Her black cocktail dress bore the understated elegance that spoke of old money and older attitudes. The nameplate on her lapel identified her as Victoria Sterling Club Manager. "What seems to be the problem?" Jennifer Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. "This gentleman says he's on our VIP list, but I can't find his name." "He has an invitation, though." Jennifer handed over the cardstock as if it might explode. Victoria examined the invitation with the same skepticism she might reserve for a counterfeit bill. "Where did you get this?" The question landed like a slap. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced at age 8, when Mrs. Henderson accused him of stealing the lunch money that had actually fallen from his own pocket. The same feeling from his Harvard days, when Professor Williams questioned whether his scholarship was really necessary. The same sensation that had fueled every subsequent success. President Mills sent it personally. Marcus replied, his voice steady, despite the growing heat in his collar. Along with his note expressing how much he looked forward to discussing the Foundation's upcoming projects. President Mills Victoria's laugh held no humor. "I seriously doubt Harrison Mills would invite." She paused, catching herself before the sentence revealed too much. "Well, there must be some mistake. This invitation could have been dropped, or perhaps..." "Perhaps what?" The voice came from behind Marcus, cutting through Victoria's implication with surgical precision. A young Asian woman with a press badge approached her phone held casually at waist level. "I'm Sarah Chen with the Metropolitan Herald. Are you suggesting this gentleman's invitation is stolen?" Victoria's face flushed. "I'm not suggesting anything of the sort. I'm simply following protocol to ensure our members' security and comfort. Whose comfort are we protecting? Exactly, Sarah's journalistic instincts had clearly activated. Because from where I'm standing, the only person who seems uncomfortable is Mr. Thompson. Marcus supplied, recognizing an ally when he saw one. Marcus Thompson. Thompson. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. As in Thompson Industries, the construction and development company. Before Marcus could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Excuse me, what's happening here? Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a prominent cardiologist Marcus recognized from local news coverage, approached the group. Her brown skin and professional bearing seemed to shift the dynamic immediately. Just a small administrative issue, Victoria said quickly. Nothing that concerns our guests. Administrative issues that involve questioning Black professionals about stolen invitations concern me very much, Dr. Walsh replied coolly. Especially when I've personally experienced similar administrative issues at clubs throughout this city. The lobby was beginning to attract attention. Other guests slowed their conversations to observe the growing tension, phones appearing in hands with increasing frequency. Marcus noticed everything, the way staff members gathered at a safe distance, whispering among themselves, how some guests looked embarrassed, while others seemed to find the situation entertaining, the security cameras recording every word and gesture. Look, Victoria said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private club with specific standards and protocols. If you can't provide proper identification and membership verification, I can provide both. Marcus interrupted, reaching for his wallet. He withdrew his driver's license and a business card, placing them on the reception desk. Illinois driver's license, current address in Lincoln Park. Business card for Thompson Industries, where I serve as Chief Executive Officer. Victoria barely glanced at the documentation. Driver's licenses can be faked. Business cards can be printed by anyone. The absurdity of the statement hung in the air like smoke from a tire fire. Sarah Chen's phone was now openly recording, and Dr. Walsh had stepped closer to Marcus in a gesture of professional solidarity. Ms. Sterling, Doctor. Walsh said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. I've been a member of this club for 8 years. I've personally vouched for 3 new members, donated over $50,000 to club charities, and served on 2 committees. In all that time, I've never seen anyone asked to verify their driver's license wasn't fake. Different circumstances require different protocols, Victoria replied stiffly. What makes these circumstances different? Sarah asked, her phone capturing every word. Mr. Thompson is impeccably dressed, has a valid invitation, and has provided identification. What exactly is the protocol for well-dressed Black men with documentation? The word black seemed to electrify the air. Several nearby conversations stopped entirely, and Marcus noticed how Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice, Victoria said to Sarah, too. You're disturbing our other guests. I think what's disturbing your guests is watching a successful businessman questioned about forged documents because of his race, Dr. Walsh replied. Marcus watched the exchange with the calm assessment of someone who'd learned to see chess moves while others played checkers. This wasn't spontaneous bias. It was systematic practice refined through repetition. Victoria's confidence suggested she'd orchestrated similar scenes before, likely without consequence. Perhaps we should call Mr. Mills directly, Marcus suggested. I have his personal cell phone number, if that would help resolve this administrative confusion. President Mills is very busy this evening, Victoria said quickly. I can't have him disturbed by every guest with questions. But you can have him disturbed by potential trespassing charges, Dr. Walsh asked. Because that's where this seems to be heading. Marcus noticed a man in his early 40s approaching their group. His Platinum Club member pin caught the light as he inserted himself into the conversation with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Chad Whitman." I couldn't help but overhear the commotion, his eyes fixed on Marcus with undisguised hostility. "Victoria, is this man bothering you?" The question was loaded with implications that made Marcus's jaw tighten. Sarah Chen's phone immediately swiveled toward Chad, capturing his self-appointed authority. "Mr. Whitman," Victoria said, relief evident in her voice. "We're just having a small verification issue with this gentleman's invitation." "I see." Chad's gaze never left Marcus. "And what seems to be the problem with verification?" "No problem at all," Marcus said evenly. "I was invited by President Mills, provided my invitation and identification, and am simply waiting for someone to honor the invitation, as they would for any other guest." "Any other guest?" Chad's eyebrows rose. "That's an interesting phrase. Are you suggesting you're being treated differently somehow?" The challenge in Chad's voice was unmistakable. Marcus recognized the type, privileged, protected, and profoundly convinced of his own righteousness. Men like Chad had appeared at every stage of Marcus's rise, from construction sites to corporate boardrooms, always surprised to find competence wrapped in unexpected packaging. "I'm suggesting that verification shouldn't require more documentation than a federal security clearance," Marcus replied. Chad's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Well, perhaps if you'd followed proper protocols from the beginning, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Victoria runs a tight ship here, and for good reason. Some people try to take advantage of our hospitality." "Some people?" Dr. Walsh stepped forward, her voice dangerously quiet. "Please clarify what you mean by some people, Mr. Whitman." Chad's face reddened slightly. "I mean people who don't understand the standards and expectations of an establishment like Meridian. People who might not be familiar with proper club etiquette." "And what about Mr. Thompson's appearance or behavior suggests unfamiliarity with club etiquette?" Sarah asked, her journalistic training evident in the precision of her question. Marcus watched Chad struggle with an answer that wouldn't sound overtly racist, while still defending his position. The man's discomfort was palpable, but his privilege was stronger. "Look," Chad said finally, "I don't know this man from Adam. He could be anyone. Victoria has every right to verify his legitimacy before allowing him access to our VIP facilities. Every right, and apparently every intention to exercise those rights selectively," Dr. Walsh observed. The conversation was drawing more attention. Marcus noticed several club members had formed a loose circle around the confrontation, some recording with phones, others whispering among themselves. A few looked genuinely uncomfortable with the scene unfolding, but none stepped forward to intervene. Ms. Sterling Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension with boardroom authority. "I'm going to make this very simple. Call President Mills. Tell him Marcus Thompson is here for the gala as his invited guest. If he says I shouldn't be here, I'll leave immediately with no further discussion." Victoria's hesitation spoke volumes. President Mills specifically asked not to be disturbed tonight unless there was a genuine emergency. A potential civil rights violation at a charity gala seems like it might qualify, Sarah suggested. The phrase, civil rights violation, sent a visible shiver through the gathering crowd. Marcus noticed how several club members suddenly found their phones very interesting, while others began drifting away from the conversation. "Civil rights violation." Chad's voice pitched higher. "That's completely ridiculous. This is a private club with the right to control access to our facilities. Private clubs still can't discriminate based on race," Dr. Walsh replied. "Particularly when the guest has proper documentation and an invitation from your president." Marcus felt the moment crystallizing around him, the point where institutional bias met individual courage, where systemic problems became personal confrontations. He'd learned to recognize these inflection points, Moments when the trajectory of events could shift dramatically based on how people chose to respond. I tell you what Marcus said, reaching into his jacket for his phone. Why don't I just call President Mills myself? Save everyone the trouble. No, Victoria's response was sharp enough to make several people jump. I mean, that really isn't necessary. If you could just wait outside while we sort this out internally. Wait outside. Dr. Walsh's voice carried the weight of professional outrage. You're asking an invited guest to wait in the parking lot while you sort out his documentation. It's just temporary, Victoria said weakly. How temporary? Sarah asked. And what exactly needs to be sorted out? You have his invitation, his identification, and his business card. What additional verification do you need? Marcus watched Victoria struggle with an answer that wouldn't reveal the obvious truth, that no amount of verification would satisfy her concerns about his presence. Her discomfort was becoming visible to everyone present, including the growing number of guests documenting the encounter. Ladies and gentlemen, a gruff voice announced from behind the crowd. I'm going to have to ask everyone to step back and let me handle this situation. The crowd parted to reveal a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, wearing a security uniform that strained across his broad chest. His nameplate identified him as Ronald Hayes, head of security, but everything about his bearing suggested a law enforcement background. His presence shifted the energy in the room immediately. Mr. Hayes, Victoria said with obvious relief, "Thank goodness you're here. We have a situation that requires your expertise." Hayes surveyed the scene with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. His eyes lingered on Marcus, longer than anyone else, taking in details that seemed to confirm some internal checklist. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? Hayes asked Victoria, though his attention remained fixed on Marcus. This gentleman claims to have an invitation to tonight's gala, but we're having difficulty verifying his credentials, Victoria explained. I see. Hayes stepped closer to Marcus, his posture subtly aggressive. Sir, I'm going to need you to produce some identification and explain what you're doing here. The demand hit Marcus like a physical blow. After 30 minutes of providing documentation, answering questions, and maintaining his composure, he was being asked to start the process over again, as if nothing had happened. I've already provided identification to Ms. Sterling. Marcus replied, his voice still steady, but carrying a new edge. My driver's license and business card are right there on the reception desk. Hayes glanced at the documents without picking them up. Anyone can print business cards, sir. And frankly, that identification could belong to anyone. It has my photograph on it, Marcus pointed out. Photographs can be altered, Hayes replied. I'm going to need you to explain how you obtained that invitation and why you believe you have a right to be in our VIP section. The word right landed with particular force. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that had fueled every major achievement in his life, the same energy that had driven him to graduate summa cum laude from Harvard, to build a construction empire from nothing, to accumulate wealth that most people couldn't imagine. My right to be here comes from President Mills's personal invitation, Marcus said, his voice carrying new steel. The same right, possessed by every other person in this room with similar documentation. That remains to be determined, Hayes replied. Until we can verify your claims, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside while we conduct our investigation. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. Investigation. What exactly are you investigating? The man has an invitation identification and has answered every question you've asked. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a security matter, Hayes said dismissively. I need to ensure the safety and comfort of our legitimate guests. Legitimate guests. Sarah's phone captured Hayes's every word. What makes Mr. Thompson illegitimate? Hayes's face hardened. I don't appreciate your tone, miss. This is a private matter involving club security. Nothing involving potential civil rights violations is private, Dr. Walsh replied, particularly when it's being recorded by multiple witnesses. Marcus noticed how the mention of recording seemed to make Hayes more aggressive rather than more cautious. The security chief's background was showing he was accustomed to situations where his authority was unquestioned and documentation was unnecessary. Sir Hayes said to Marcus, his voice taking on an official tone, "I'm asking you one more time to wait outside while we resolve this matter. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to call local law enforcement for trespassing." The threat hung in the air like tear gas. Marcus felt every eye in the lobby focused on him, waiting to see how he would respond. This was the moment, the inflection point where dignity met pragmatism, where principle confronted power. Trespassing, Marcus repeated quietly. At an event I was personally invited to attend, alleged invitation, Hayes corrected, until verified by appropriate authorities. Marcus looked around the room at the faces watching him, some sympathetic, some hostile, most carefully neutral. He thought about the phone calls he could make the authorities. He could summon the lawyers who would arrive within the hour. He thought about the social media storm already building as videos of the confrontation spread beyond the room. Most of all, he thought about the young Marcus Thompson, who had learned to swallow his pride and pick his battles carefully. That young man had become very successful by knowing when to fight and when to wait for better positioning. Very well, Marcus said finally. I'll wait outside while you conduct your investigation. The collective exhale from club staff was audible. Victoria looked triumphant. Chad appeared satisfied, and Hayes seemed pleased with his show of authority. But Dr. Walsh and Sarah Chen looked horrified, and Marcus noticed several club members pulling out phones to make calls of their own. As Marcus walked toward the exit, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The call was answered on the first ring. Angela, it's time. Activate the acquisition protocol. The call lasted exactly 30 seconds, but Marcus spoke quietly enough that only he heard the response. Understood, sir. Legal team is en route. Should I notify the federal contacts? Not yet, Marcus replied as he pushed through the club's ornate front doors. Let's see how deep this particular rabbit hole goes. As the door closed behind him, Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries Harvard MBA, and now former guest of Meridian Country Club, stood in the parking lot and began making a series of phone calls that would change everything. Inside the club, Victoria Sterling was about to discover that some people don't just fight back, they buy the whole battlefield. Finally, I knew there was something off about that guy from the moment he walked in. Chad Whitman's voice carried across the marble lobby as the ornate front doors closed behind Marcus Thompson. The tension that had gripped the room for 30 minutes seemed to evaporate, replaced by a collective sigh of relief from club staff and the uncomfortable shuffle of departing onlookers. Excellent work, Victoria. Chad continued, straightening his platinum member pin. You handled that perfectly. Some people need to learn they can't just show up anywhere they please with a piece of paper. Victoria Sterling felt a flush of vindication wash over her. 20 years in hospitality management had taught her to trust her instincts about people, and everything about Marcus Thompson had felt wrong from the moment he'd approached her reception desk. Too confident, too well-dressed, too comfortable in spaces where he clearly didn't belong. Thank you, Mr. Whitman, she replied, smoothing her black cocktail dress. Security is always our top priority. We can't be too careful these days. Dr. Jennifer Walsh remained rooted near the reception desk, her dark eyes blazing with fury. Too careful about what exactly? Successful black men attending charity galas. The directness of her question sent another ripple of discomfort through the lingering crowd. Several guests found sudden urgent need to check their phones or visit the restroom, while others pretended deep interest in the club's marble columns. Dr. Walsh Victoria said with forced patience, this had nothing to do with Mr. Thompson's race. We would have asked the same questions of anyone whose documentation seemed questionable. Questionable how Sarah Chen interjected her phone still recording. The young journalist had positioned herself strategically near the reception desk, capturing every word and gesture. His invitation was authentic. His identification was valid, and his behavior was completely appropriate. Ronald Hayes, the security chief, stepped forward with the bearing of someone accustomed to closing conversations, rather than continuing them. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording on club property. This is a private establishment." "Actually," Sarah replied, consulting notes on her phone. "Illinois law permits recording in public spaces, and the Supreme Court has ruled that areas open to public accommodation qualify. But I'll be sure to note your objection in my article." "Your article?" Victoria's voice pitched higher. "You're writing about this Metro Herald's weekend edition," Sarah confirmed. "Though given the video engagement on my social media posts, this might make tomorrow's front page instead." Victoria felt her stomach drop. Social media. She'd been so focused on handling the immediate situation that she hadn't considered how it might look to outside observers. But surely people would understand she'd simply been following proper security protocols. "How many views so far?" Dr. Walsh asked, with the satisfied tone of someone watching justice unfold in real time. Sarah checked her phone. 47,000 on Instagram, 22,000 on TikTok, and climbing fast. The hashtag Meridian Discrimination is already trending locally. The blood drained from Victoria's face. Trending. Her carefully managed crisis was becoming a public relations nightmare, spreading beyond the club's walls at digital speed. "Those posts are completely misleading," Chad interjected. "They don't provide the full context of the security concerns." "What security concerns?" Dr. Walsh demanded. "A well-dressed businessman with proper documentation." "We don't know he was a businessman," Hayes replied. "Anyone can print business cards." Sarah pulled up something on her phone. Thompson Industries, founded 2001. Annual revenue $2.8 billion, headquarters in Chicago. CEO Marcus Thompson. LinkedIn shows him graduating Harvard Business School. Forbes listed him as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs 3 years running. She looked up at Hayes. "Still think he printed those business cards at Kinko's?" The information hit the group like cold water. Victoria felt her carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble as Sarah continued reading from her phone. Major construction projects include the Millennium Tower renovation, Harbor Point development, and the new Children's Hospital wing. Philanthropic activities include the Thompson Educational Foundation, which has donated over $50 million to scholarship programs for underprivileged youth. That doesn't change anything," Victoria stammered. "We couldn't have known that information when he arrived." "You could have asked," Dr. Walsh pointed out. "Or you could have simply honored his invitation, like you would for any other guest." Chad's face was growing redder by the minute. "This is ridiculous. We're being made to feel guilty for following proper security procedures. What's next? Accusations of racism every time we ask for identification." "Only when you ask for identification selectively," Sarah replied, her journalistic instincts fully engaged. Dr. Walsh, as a longtime member. "How often have you seen guests asked to verify their driver's licenses weren't fake?" "Never," Dr. Walsh replied without hesitation. "In 8 years of membership, I've never seen anyone asked to prove their invitation wasn't stolen or their identification wasn't forged. Different circumstances require different approaches," Hayes insisted, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "What made tonight's circumstances different?" Sarah pressed. The question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, visible, acrid, and impossible to ignore. Victoria realized they'd reached the moment every discrimination case turned on the point where defenders had to explain why standard procedures, suddenly became insufficient. "Well," Victoria began carefully, "Mr. Thompson seemed unfamiliar with our protocols." "What protocols did he violate?" Dr. Walsh asked. He was somewhat aggressive in his responses. Quote, his aggressive language. Sarah requested phone ready to record. Victoria found herself unable to recall a single aggressive word from Marcus Thompson's carefully modulated responses. If anything, his composure had been remarkable under circumstances that would have made most people lose their temper entirely. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Victoria tried. Dr. Walsh said with the tone of someone who'd heard this particular deflection before. The tone defense. I'm quite familiar with that one from my own experiences at various establishments. The lobby doors opened, and a distinguished gentleman in his late 60s entered, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his tuxedo bearing the hallmarks of Savile Row craftsmanship. President Harrison Mills had arrived for his own gala, completely unaware that his evening was about to become significantly more complicated. Harrison Chad called out with obvious relief. Perfect timing. We've had a small situation that I think you should know about. President Mills approached the group with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room, staff straightening and guests deferring to his obvious authority. Good evening, everyone, Mills said warmly. What sort of situation are we discussing? Victoria stepped forward eagerly. Mr. Mills, we had a man claiming to be your invited guest, but his documentation seemed questionable. We followed proper security protocols and asked him to wait outside while we verified his credentials. Mills frowned slightly. Claimed to be my guest. What was his name? Thompson Hayes provided. Marcus Thompson. The color drained from President Mills' face so rapidly that Dr. Walsh instinctively stepped forward in case he needed medical assistance. Mills' hand went to his chest, and he stared at Victoria with an expression of growing horror. Marcus Thompson. Mills repeated weakly. You asked Marcus Thompson to wait outside. You know him? Victoria asked, her confidence beginning to crack. Know him. Mills' voice rose an octave. Victoria, Marcus Thompson is not just my invited guest. He's the single largest donor to our charity foundation. His companies have contributed over $3 million to club charities in the past 5 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as the implications began to crystallize. Sarah Chen's phone captured every moment of the revelation, while Dr. Walsh watched with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been completely vindicated. But he didn't mention any of that. Victoria protested weakly. Why should he have to? Mills demanded. He had my personal invitation. That should have been sufficient. Chad Whitman, who had been so confident moments before now, looked like a man watching his house burn down. Harrison, surely you understand our position. We couldn't have known. Couldn't have known what Chad Mills interrupted. Couldn't have known that a well-dressed gentleman with a valid invitation deserved to be treated with basic courtesy. The president pulled out his phone and dialed a number with shaking fingers. Marcus. It's Harrison Mills. I just learned about what happened at the club tonight, and I am absolutely mortified. The conversation that followed was brief, with Mills doing most of the talking and very little listening. His face grew paler with each passing second, and by the time he hung up, he looked like a man who'd just received devastating medical news. Where is he now? Mills asked Victoria. In the parking lot, I believe. We asked him to wait while we sorted everything out. Mills closed his eyes, as if in physical pain. You asked Marcus Thompson, Harvard MBA CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and one of the most respected businessmen in Chicago, to wait in our parking lot like a delivery driver. We didn't know his credentials, Hayes protested. You didn't ask about his credentials, Dr. Walsh corrected. You assumed he didn't belong and worked backward to justify that assumption. Mills looked around the group with the expression of someone surveying a disaster zone. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus Thompson isn't just a donor. He's connected to every major business leader in this city. His recommendation carries weight with judges, politicians, corporate executives. Surely he'll understand it was just a misunderstanding, Chad suggested hopefully. A misunderstanding. Mills' voice cracked. Chad, there are videos of this encounter all over social media. By tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country will be covering the story of how Meridian Country Club treated one of America's most successful black entrepreneurs. Sarah Chen looked up from her phone. Actually, it's already hitting national news. CNN just picked up the story and I'm getting interview requests from NBC, ABC, and Fox. Victoria felt the world tilting around her. National news coverage. This was supposed to be a simple security matter resolved quietly and forgotten by morning. Instead, it was becoming a media circus with Meridian Country Club at the center. The phone is ringing off the hook, Jennifer announced from behind the reception desk. 3 news crews are en route, and I have reporters from the Tribune, Sun-Times, and Daily Herald demanding statements. Mills sank into one of the lobby's antique chairs, as if his legs could no longer support him. 27 years I've been president of this club. 27 years of building relationships, establishing our reputation, creating partnerships with the city's most influential people. And in one evening, he didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implications. The club's carefully cultivated image was crumbling in real time, documented and broadcast to a world increasingly intolerant of institutional discrimination. Dr. Walsh's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, then looked up with an expression that somehow managed to combine satisfaction with deep concern. Marcus Thompson just posted a statement on LinkedIn, she announced. It has already received over 10,000 comments and 1,500 shares. What does it say? Mills asked weakly. Dr. Walsh read from her phone. Tonight I experienced firsthand the systemic bias that still permeates many of our most prestigious institutions. Despite having proper documentation and an invitation from the club president himself, I was questioned, suspected of fraud, and ultimately asked to leave based solely on assumptions about my right to belong. This incident illustrates why diversity and inclusion initiatives remain necessary in 2024. I hope this experience serves as a learning opportunity for institutional leaders everywhere. The statement was measured, professional, and devastating in its restraint. Marcus Thompson wasn't lashing out or making inflammatory accusations. He was simply describing events factually and allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. The approach made his account impossible to dismiss or discredit. He's being quite gracious, actually, Dr. Walsh observed. A lesser man might have demanded heads to roll immediately. Victoria grasped at this small hope. So he's not planning to sue or anything? Dr. Walsh's laugh was sharp. Oh, honey, you clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. Marcus Thompson doesn't sue people when they discriminate against him. He buys their companies and fires them instead. The ominous statement sent a chill through the assembled group. Mills looked up sharply, his financial background allowing him to process the implications faster than the others. What do you mean buys their companies? Mills asked. Thompson Industries isn't just a construction company, Dr. Walsh explained. It's an investment conglomerate with holdings in real estate, hospitality, entertainment, and finance. Marcus has a reputation for acquiring businesses that treat him poorly and then implementing comprehensive diversity reforms. He can't buy. Meridian, Chad protested. We're a private club, not a publicly traded company. Dr. Walsh smiled grimly. Private clubs have mortgages, insurance policies, vendor contracts, and debt obligations, all of which can be purchased, called in, or canceled under the right circumstances. Mills' face had gone ashen. As club president, he knew better than anyone how leveraged Meridian's finances were, how dependent they were on external relationships and ongoing credit arrangements. If someone with Marcus Thompson's resources decided to apply pressure, surely he wouldn't go that far over a simple misunderstanding, Victoria said, though her voice lacked conviction. A simple misunderstanding. Sarah Chen looked up from her phone, where notifications were streaming in continuously. Ms. Sterling. This story has now been shared over 100,000 times across social media platforms. Meridian discrimination is trending nationally. The NAACP has issued a statement calling for a federal investigation. 3 separate civil rights organizations have announced plans to picket the club tomorrow. Each piece of information landed like a physical blow. Victoria realized that her simple security check had somehow triggered a national conversation about racism and privilege. The carefully ordered world she'd maintained for 20 years was dissolving around her. "This has to stop," she said desperately. "Can't we just call him back inside? Apologize and move on?" Mills looked at her with something approaching pity. "Victoria, you asked a black billionaire to wait in the parking lot while you verified whether his invitation was stolen. This isn't the kind of situation that gets resolved with an apology and complimentary champagne." The lobby doors opened again, and a professionally dressed Latina woman in her 30s entered, followed by 2 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Their appearance immediately suggested legal representation of the highest caliber. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching the group with confident strides. "I'm Angela Rodriguez, Chief Legal Counsel for Thompson Industries. I'm here regarding the discriminatory treatment of my client, Marcus Thompson." The cavalry had arrived, and Victoria Sterling was beginning to understand that her problems were just getting started. "I want every member of the staff involved in this incident in the boardroom immediately, and I want a full explanation of what the hell happened here tonight." President Harrison Mills' voice echoed through the marble corridors of Meridian Country Club as he led an emergency procession toward the executive boardroom. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his bow tie, 27 years of institutional leadership crumbling beneath the weight of a single evening's catastrophic mismanagement. Victoria Sterling followed behind him, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded increasingly like a countdown timer. Her mind raced through possible explanations, justifications, and damage control strategies. But each scenario seemed to end with her career in ruins and the club facing potential federal intervention. The boardroom itself was a monument to old money and older attitudes. Rich mahogany paneling, oil paintings of long-dead founding members, and crystal chandeliers that had illuminated countless decisions affecting Chicago's social and business elite. Tonight, those same chandeliers would witness an institutional reckoning decades in the making. Jennifer Mills called to the reception desk manager as she entered the room. "I want you to document everything that happened from the moment Mr. Thompson arrived. Every conversation, every decision, every word exchanged." Jennifer's hands trembled as she opened her notepad. Her involvement in the evening's events felt increasingly like complicity in a crime she hadn't realized she was committing. Chad Whitman entered the boardroom with the swagger of someone still convinced of his righteousness, though his confidence had dimmed considerably since Marcus Thompson's identity was revealed. As the son of Senator William Whitman, Chad was accustomed to his opinions carrying weight in elite circles, but tonight even his family name felt insufficient protection. Ronald Hayes, the security chief, filled the doorway with his bulk, his ex-police officer bearing intact despite the growing evidence that his law enforcement instincts had failed catastrophically. He'd handled thousands of situations during his career, but none had ever spiraled so completely beyond his control. "Before we begin," Mills announced, "I want everyone to understand the gravity of what we're facing. This isn't just a public relations problem or a customer service failure. We're potentially looking at federal civil rights violations, discrimination lawsuits, loss of our tax-exempt status, and the complete destruction of this institution's reputation." The weight of his words settled over the room like fog. Victoria felt her carefully constructed world continuing its collapse, but she clung to the hope that somehow this could still be managed, contained, explained away. Now Mills continued. "I want to hear exactly what happened, step by step from every person involved." Victoria straightened her shoulders, drawing on 20 years of hospitality management experience. "Mr. Mills, when the gentleman arrived claiming to have an invitation, I simply followed standard security protocols. His name wasn't immediately visible on our guest list, and his documentation seemed—" "Stop." Mills held up his hand. His name wasn't visible. Marcus Thompson was personally added to the VIP list by me 3 weeks ago. I have the email confirmation right here on my phone. He held up his device, showing an exchange between himself and the club's event coordinator, clearly confirming Marcus Thompson's VIP status for the charity gala. The timestamp showed the invitation had been processed and confirmed weeks before the event. Victoria's stomach dropped. I must have missed that entry somehow. But even so, we couldn't be too careful. Couldn't be too careful about what the voice came from the boardroom entrance where a distinguished black woman in her late 50s had appeared. Judge Patricia Brown, a longtime club member and respected federal magistrate, entered with the bearing of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence and delivering verdicts. Judge Brown, Mills said with obvious relief, "Thank goodness you're here. Perhaps you can help us understand the legal implications of this situation." Judge Brown took her seat at the mahogany table with deliberate precision. "Harrison, I've been a member of this club for 12 years. I've served on 3 committees donated to every major fundraiser and brought dozens of guests to various events. In all that time, I've never once been asked to verify that my invitation wasn't stolen or my identification wasn't forged." Her words carried the weight of judicial authority, and Victoria felt each one like a gavel strike. The judge's presence transformed the emergency meeting from an internal damage control session into something approaching a legal proceeding. Judge Brown Chad interjected, "Surely you understand that different situations require different approaches. Security concerns in today's environment." "Mr. Whitman." Judge Brown interrupted, her voice cutting through his explanation with surgical precision. "I've presided over dozens of discrimination cases during my career. What you're describing aren't security concerns. They're pretexts. Legally speaking, pretexts that could expose this institution to significant federal liability." The legal implications landed like a thunderbolt. Mills realized that his club wasn't just facing bad publicity. They were potentially facing federal investigation, civil rights prosecutions, and financial penalties that could destroy the institution entirely. "What exactly are we looking at from a legal standpoint?" Mills asked weakly. Judge Brown consulted her phone, where she'd apparently been reviewing relevant statutes. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination in public accommodations. While private clubs have some exemptions, those exemptions disappear when clubs open their facilities to the general public for charitable events, as you did tonight. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "But we weren't discriminating. We were just following security protocols." Ms. Sterling Judge Brown replied, her tone carrying decades of courtroom authority. "Selective enforcement of protocols based on race is the textbook definition of discrimination. The fact that you didn't intend to discriminate is legally irrelevant if your actions had discriminatory effects." The boardroom door opened, and Sarah Chen entered with the confident stride of a journalist who knew she was witnessing history unfold. Her presence reminded everyone that this private crisis was becoming increasingly public with each passing moment. "Excuse me," Sarah said, But I thought you should know that major news outlets are now picking up the story. CNN, NBC, and the Washington Post have all requested statements, and civil rights organizations are planning demonstrations for tomorrow. Mills buried his head in his hands. How many people saw the original confrontation in person? Maybe 30 or 40 guests, Sarah replied. But my initial video post has been shared over 200,000 times across platforms, and derivative posts are going viral. The hashtag Meridian Discrimination is now trending nationally. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. What had started as a private club incident was evolving into a national conversation about institutional racism, with Meridian Country Club serving as the primary example of elite discrimination. There's more, Sarah continued. Several prominent club members have already issued public statements distancing themselves from tonight's events. Senator Williams, Judge Parker, and CEO Davidson have all called for immediate institutional reforms. Chad's face went white. Senator Williams. But he's been a member for 20 years. Apparently 20 years of membership doesn't outweigh viral videos of discrimination, Sarah replied. Social media has a way of clarifying people's priorities. The boardroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Meridian Country Club's carefully cultivated network of influential members was beginning to abandon ship, leaving the institution increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Judge Brown's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. I need to take this. It's from the Attorney General's office. The conversation that followed was brief and entirely one-sided, with Judge Brown mostly listening and occasionally asking for clarification. Her expression grew more serious with each exchange, and by the time she hung up, she looked like someone who'd just received devastating news. That was the Federal Civil Rights Division, she announced. They've opened a preliminary investigation based on the social media evidence. They're sending investigators tomorrow to interview witnesses and review club policies. Mills felt his world spinning completely out of control. Federal investigators, congressional attention, national media coverage. His tenure as club president was ending not with the quiet dignity he'd planned, but with the complete destruction of everything he'd worked to build. Surely this can be resolved quietly, Victoria pleaded. If we just explain the circumstances, apologize for any misunderstanding. Ms. Sterling, Judge Brown interrupted. You're still not grasping the severity of the situation. Federal civil rights investigations don't get resolved with apologies. They get resolved with consent decrees, court-ordered reforms, and comprehensive oversight programs. Victoria's last hopes of damage control evaporated. She'd gone from club manager to potential federal defendant in the span of 4 hours, all because she'd questioned a well-dressed black man's right to attend a charity gala. The boardroom door opened again, and Angela Rodriguez entered, followed by 2 additional attorneys whose expensive suits and serious expressions suggested the arrival of serious legal firepower. Gentlemen, ladies, Angela announced, I'm here on behalf of Thompson Industries to discuss the discriminatory treatment of our CEO earlier this evening. Mills looked up hopefully. Ms. Rodriguez, perhaps we can resolve this matter quietly between professionals. I'm prepared to issue a personal apology to Mr. Thompson and implement immediate policy changes. Mr. Mills, Angela interrupted. I appreciate your willingness to apologize, but this matter has moved beyond simple policy adjustments. My client has documented evidence of systematic discrimination at this institution spanning several years. The statement hit the room like a bomb. Victoria stared at Angela in confusion, while Mills felt his chest tighten with the implications of long-term legal exposure. What do you mean, systematic discrimination? Mills asked weakly. Angela opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Thompson Industries has been conducting a comprehensive investigation of discriminatory practices at elite institutions throughout Chicago. Your club has been under observation for 18 months. The revelation sent shockwaves through the boardroom. Victoria realized that tonight's incident wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of a long-term investigation that had been building toward this moment. Investigation, Chad sputtered. What kind of investigation? The kind that documents patterns of racial bias, selective enforcement of policies, and systematic exclusion of minority guests, Angela replied calmly. We have video evidence, witness statements, and documented complaints spanning multiple years. Judge Brown leaned forward with professional interest. Are you suggesting this was a sting operation? Not a sting, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson was genuinely invited to tonight's gala by President Mills. However, our investigation predicted exactly how he would be treated based on established patterns of discrimination at this institution. Victoria felt the floor disappearing beneath her feet. Her security protocols hadn't been random. They'd been predictable, documented, and apparently illegal. Everything she'd thought she was doing right had been exactly what Marcus Thompson's investigation expected her to do wrong. Mills looked around the boardroom at the faces of his staff, his board members, and the attorneys who now seemed to hold his institution's future in their hands. What happens now? Angela's expression remained professionally neutral. That depends entirely on how seriously this institution takes comprehensive reform. Half measures and cosmetic changes won't suffice. We're talking about fundamental transformation of policies, procedures, and institutional culture. And if we refuse, Chad asked his privilege, still making him believe he had negotiating power. Angela's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Mr. Whitman Thompson, Industries has significant influence with your mortgage holders, insurance providers, vendor networks, and credit facilities. Refusal to implement comprehensive reforms would be financially inadvisable. The threat was delivered with such professional calm that it took several seconds for its implications to sink in. Marcus Thompson wasn't just seeking an apology or policy changes. He was in a position to apply economic pressure that could destroy the club entirely. Mills realized that his emergency staff meeting had become something else entirely, a negotiation for Meridian Country Club's survival with Marcus Thompson holding all the cards and the moral authority to play them however he chose. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus Thompson finished another phone call and checked his watch. The acquisition protocols were proceeding exactly as planned, and by morning Meridian Country Club would discover that sometimes discrimination carried a price tag they couldn't afford to pay. Sir, you need to understand that federal civil rights investigations don't just disappear because you're uncomfortable with the attention. Detective Maria Santos stepped through the ornate entrance of Meridian Country Club with the measured pace of someone accustomed to crime scenes and hostile witnesses. Her badge gleamed under the crystal chandelier as she surveyed the marble lobby where clusters of club members whispered among themselves while social media notifications chimed continuously on phones throughout the room. Behind her followed FBI Special Agent Catherine Morrison, whose presence immediately elevated the evening from local incident to federal case. The two women moved through the crowd with professional authority, their contrasting backgrounds. Santos from Chicago PD's Civil Rights Division, Morrison from the FBI's Hate Crimes Unit, representing the full spectrum of law enforcement interest in the evening's events. I need to speak with whoever's in charge of this establishment, Detective Santos announced to the reception desk, where Jennifer sat, surrounded by ringing phones and growing stacks of message slips from reporters demanding statements. Jennifer looked up with the expression of someone drowning in circumstances beyond her control. President Mills is in an emergency board meeting in the executive wing. Should I? Yes, Agent Morrison replied firmly. Interrupt the meeting. This is a federal civil rights investigation, not a dinner reservation. In the parking lot, Marcus Thompson ended another call and allowed himself a brief smile as he watched federal agents enter the building. Angela Rodriguez had been correct once video evidence of institutional discrimination went viral. Federal attention became inevitable. The only variable had been timing. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Washington, D.C. Marcus glanced at the caller ID and felt his pulse quicken slightly. Congressional interest meant the story had reached the highest levels of government, where civil rights violations became political opportunities and institutional reform became legislative priorities. Congressman Davis Marcus answered. "I appreciate you reaching out, Marcus. I've been watching the social media coverage of tonight's incident." Congressman James Davis replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who chaired the House Subcommittee on Civil Rights. "This kind of blatant discrimination cannot stand, especially not at an institution that benefits from tax-exempt status." The conversation that followed was brief but decisive. Congressional oversight hearings, federal funding reviews, and comprehensive civil rights audits were all on the table, depending on how seriously Meridian Country Club took meaningful reform. Inside the boardroom, President Mills looked up from his emergency meeting as Detective Santos and Agent Morrison entered without invitation. Their presence transformed the room's energy, immediately shifting from damage control to damage assessment under federal scrutiny. "Gentlemen, ladies," Detective Santos announced. "I'm Detective Maria Santos with Chicago PD's Civil Rights Division, and this is FBI Special Agent Catherine Morrison. We're here to investigate allegations of civil rights violations that occurred at this establishment earlier this evening." The words "federal investigation" landed like artillery shells. Victoria Sterling felt her remaining composure shatter as she realized her career wasn't just ending, it was ending under federal investigation for civil rights violations. Officers Mills said weakly, "Surely this is a misunderstanding that can be resolved through internal channels. We're prepared to implement immediate policy changes." Mr. Mills, Agent Morrison interrupted. "Federal civil rights violations aren't resolved through internal policy changes. They're resolved through comprehensive investigation, legal proceedings, and court-supervised reform agreements." Angela Rodriguez looked up from her legal documents with professional satisfaction. "Agents Thompson Industries is prepared to provide full cooperation with your investigation, including documentation of discriminatory patterns spanning multiple years." The offer of multi-year documentation sent visible shockwaves through the club leadership. Victoria realized that tonight's incident wasn't an isolated event, but the culmination of an investigation that had been building comprehensive evidence of institutional discrimination. Judge Brown addressed the federal agents with judicial authority. "I'm Judge Patricia Brown, federal magistrate and longtime club member. I can provide legal context regarding the systematic nature of discriminatory practices at this institution." Her offer to provide evidence against her own club demonstrated the severity of the situation. Mills realized that Meridian's most prominent members were choosing federal cooperation over institutional loyalty. Chad Whitman, whose privilege had protected him throughout his adult life, finally began to understand that federal agents didn't care about his family name or political connections. "This is completely blown out of proportion," he protested. "We were simply following security protocols." "Mr. Whitman," Detective Santos replied, "selective enforcement of security protocols based on race is the legal definition of discriminatory treatment. We'll need you to remain available for questioning regarding your role in tonight's events." Chad's face went ashen as he realized he wasn't just a witness to federal proceedings, he was a potential subject of investigation. His casual racism had evolved from social embarrassment to federal liability in the span of hours. Sarah Chen, who had been documenting the evening's events with journalistic precision, approached the federal agents with professional courtesy. "Agents, I'm Sarah Chen with the Metropolitan Herald. I have comprehensive video documentation of the discriminatory treatment, including multiple angles and complete audio." Ms. Chen, Agent Morrison replied, "We'll need copies of all documentation for evidence purposes. This kind of comprehensive coverage is invaluable for federal prosecution. The mention of prosecution sent final tremors through the assembled group. Victoria realized that her situation had evolved from employment termination to potential federal prosecution for civil rights violations. Robert Kim, the club's treasurer, entered the boardroom with financial documents and an expression of barely controlled panic. "Mr. Mills," he announced breathlessly, "our insurance company is threatening policy cancellation. 3 major lenders are calling loans due immediately, and our largest corporate sponsors are withdrawing from future events." The financial implications were cascading faster than anyone had anticipated. Mills realized that Meridian Country Club wasn't just facing legal problems. They were facing complete financial collapse as corporate partners distanced themselves from potential civil rights violations. "How much exposure are we looking at?" Mills asked weakly. Kim consulted his emergency financial analysis. "If current trends continue, we're looking at complete insolvency within 60 days. Our operating expenses exceed projected revenue by enormous margins without corporate sponsorship and membership fees." Angela Rodriguez looked up from her legal briefing with professional interest. "Gentlemen, Thompson Industries is prepared to discuss financial arrangements that could preserve this institution contingent on comprehensive reforms and federal oversight agreements." The offer carried obvious implications. Marcus Thompson was in a position to purchase the club's debt obligations, effectively gaining control of the institution that had discriminated against him hours earlier. Mills felt his world spinning completely beyond his control. The man they'd asked to wait in the parking lot was now negotiating to become their financial savior and potential owner, with federal agents documenting every aspect of the discriminatory treatment that had created the crisis. Detective Santos addressed the room with official authority. "Everyone involved in tonight's incident needs to remain available for federal questioning. This includes management staff, security personnel, and any members who participated in or witnessed the discriminatory treatment." Victoria realized that her involvement in federal civil rights proceedings would follow her for the rest of her career. No amount of hospitality management experience would overcome a federal investigation record for institutional discrimination. Hayes, the security chief, finally spoke up with the defensive tone of someone whose law enforcement background was being challenged by actual law enforcement. "I was simply following established protocols for suspicious individuals." "Mr. Hayes," Agent Morrison interrupted, "those protocols will be thoroughly reviewed for discriminatory implementation. Your background in law enforcement makes selective bias particularly concerning from a federal perspective." Hayes realized that his police background, which he'd considered protective, was actually making his situation worse. Federal agents were less impressed by his authority than concerned about systematic bias in his professional judgment. Outside the building, Marcus Thompson received another call from his investment team. The acquisition protocols were proceeding ahead of schedule, with Meridian's financial partners proving eager to distance themselves from potential civil rights liability. By morning, Thompson Industries would control the majority of the club's debt obligations. Angela Marcus said into his phone, "Proceed with the full acquisition package. I want complete control of the institution by tomorrow afternoon." The conversation was brief, but decisive. Meridian Country Club would survive the crisis, but under new ownership and management that would transform it into a model of inclusive excellence rather than exclusive discrimination. Inside the boardroom, Mills received a call from the club's largest donor, threatening complete withdrawal of support unless drastic action was taken to address the discrimination crisis. What Mills didn't know was that the donor was actually Marcus Thompson's investment partner, and the threatened withdrawal was part of a coordinated pressure campaign. As federal agents continued documenting the evening's events, and club leadership struggled with mounting legal and financial pressure, Victoria Sterling realized that her decision to question a well-dressed black man's invitation had triggered the complete transformation of one of Chicago's most exclusive institutions. The pressure cooker had reached maximum heat, and Meridian Country Club was about to discover that some explosions change everything forever. Mr. Mills, I need you to understand that 300 years of institutional history can disappear overnight when federal prosecutors decide to make an example of discriminatory practices. Attorney General Lisa Parks' voice carried across the speakerphone in President Mills's private office, with the authority of someone who'd built her career prosecuting civil rights violations. Her call at 11:47 p.m. meant the Meridian Country Club incident had reached the highest levels of federal attention, where institutional discrimination became political opportunity and comprehensive reform became non-negotiable. Mills sat in his leather chair, surrounded by financial documents that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Club treasurer Robert Kim had spread bankruptcy projections across the mahogany desk, while Angela Rodriguez reviewed federal compliance requirements that would transform the institution beyond recognition. Attorney General Park Mills replied weakly, "I want to assure you that Meridian Country Club is committed to addressing any policy deficiencies that may have contributed to tonight's unfortunate incident." Mr. Mills Park interrupted. "Federal prosecutors don't investigate policy deficiencies. We investigate criminal civil rights violations. The difference is approximately 15 years in federal prison." The threat crystallized Mills' situation with devastating clarity. His legacy as club president wouldn't be measured in successful galas or prestigious memberships, but in whether he could avoid federal prosecution for institutional discrimination. Kim looked up from his financial analysis with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Mills, our liability insurance has been canceled, effective immediately. Legal defense costs alone could exceed $2 million, and that's before any federal penalties or civil settlements." The financial death spiral was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control. Meridian Country Club, which had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and multiple economic recessions, was facing complete destruction within hours of asking Marcus Thompson to wait in the parking lot. Angela Rodriguez consulted her legal documents with professional satisfaction. "Gentlemen, Thompson Industries is prepared to assume the club's debt obligations and legal liabilities, contingent on complete institutional transformation under federal oversight." Her offer represented the only path to survival, but it required acknowledging that Marcus Thompson, the man they discriminated against, would become their savior and owner. The irony was lost on no one in the room. Victoria Sterling sat in the adjoining conference room under federal questioning, her 20-year hospitality career dissolving under Detective Santos's methodical review of discriminatory practices. Each policy decision, each staff directive, each security protocol was being analyzed for evidence of systematic bias. "Ms. Sterling," Detective Santos said, reviewing her notes, "you stated that Mr. Thompson seemed unfamiliar with club protocols. Can you specify which protocols he violated?" Victoria struggled to identify any actual policy violations from Marcus Thompson's behavior. His documentation had been perfect, his attire appropriate, his demeanor professional. The only thing unusual about his presence had been her assumption that he didn't belong. "He was persistent in questioning our verification procedures," Victoria offered weakly. "So, questioning discriminatory treatment violates club protocols?" Santos asked. Victoria realized that every answer she provided was creating additional evidence of institutional bias. Her attempts at explanation were actually strengthening the federal case against the club. Chad Whitman paced outside the conference room, his political family's influence proving worthless against federal civil rights investigators. His father, Senator William Whitman, had already issued a public statement distancing himself from his son's actions and supporting comprehensive civil rights enforcement. "Chad," his father had said, during their brief phone conversation, "you've embarrassed our family and destroyed your own future. I can't protect you from federal prosecution, especially not when video evidence is spreading across every news outlet in America. The abandonment by his political family completed Chad's transformation from privileged member to federal investigation subject. His casual racism had evolved into potential criminal liability in a matter of hours. Hayes, the security chief, faced questioning about his law enforcement background and pattern of aggressive responses to minority guests. Agent Morrison had discovered multiple complaints about his behavior during his police career, creating a documented history of bias that strengthened federal prosecution prospects. Mr. Hayes Morrison said, reviewing his personnel file, "You had 14 complaints filed against you for excessive force during your police career, with 12 involving minority suspects. Tonight's incident fits an established pattern of discriminatory behavior." Hayes realized that his police background, intended to provide authority and credibility, was actually evidence of systematic bias that made his federal prosecution more likely. His law enforcement experience was becoming a liability rather than an asset. Jennifer Walsh and Judge Patricia Brown had become star witnesses for the federal investigation, their professional credentials and longtime membership providing unassailable testimony about institutional discrimination. Their cooperation demonstrated how completely Meridian's most respected members had abandoned the club's leadership. Your Honor, Detective Santos addressed Judge Brown. How would you characterize the systematic nature of discriminatory practices at this institution? Detective Judge Brown replied with judicial authority. In 12 years of membership, I've documented 15 separate incidents of minority guests being subjected to enhanced security scrutiny. Tonight's treatment of Mr. Thompson was entirely predictable based on established patterns. Her testimony provided federal prosecutors with documented evidence of systematic discrimination spanning multiple years. Meridian Country Club's liability was expanding from a single incident to a comprehensive pattern of civil rights violations. Sarah Chen had become the evening's most important witness, her comprehensive video documentation providing federal evidence that would be impossible to challenge or discredit. Her journalism background had created a perfect record of institutional discrimination in real time. Ms. Chen, Agent Morrison said, reviewing her video evidence, "This documentation will be crucial for federal prosecution. Rarely do we have such comprehensive evidence of discriminatory treatment captured from multiple angles." Sarah's accidental documentation had evolved into career-defining journalism and federal evidence simultaneously. Her social media posts were becoming legal exhibits in what promised to be a landmark civil rights case. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus Thompson concluded a conference call with civil rights organizations who were coordinating national response to the discrimination incident. The NAACP Southern Poverty Law Center and Congressional Black Caucus were all monitoring the situation and prepared to support comprehensive federal action. "The legal framework is in place," Marcus told his investment team. "By tomorrow afternoon, we'll control the club's financial obligations and federal compliance requirements. The transformation can begin immediately." His strategic response to discrimination was proceeding exactly as planned. Rather than seeking revenge or pursuing emotional satisfaction, Marcus was implementing systematic institutional change that would create lasting impact beyond a single incident. Inside the boardroom, Mills received another devastating call from club members demanding immediate resignations of all staff involved in the discrimination incident. Senator Williams, Judge Parker, and CEO Davidson had organized a membership revolt that was gaining momentum with each passing hour. Harrison Senator Williams said during their brief conversation, "The membership is united in demanding accountability. If you can't clean house immediately, we'll be forced to consider alternative leadership." The membership revolt meant Mills faced pressure from above and below simultaneously. Federal investigators were building criminal cases, while club members were demanding immediate resignations of everyone involved in the discriminatory treatment. Kim presented updated financial projections that showed complete institutional collapse within days without external intervention. Mr. Mills Thompson Industries is our only viable option for survival. Every other potential investor has withdrawn interest due to federal investigation risks. The reality was inescapable. Marcus Thompson, the man they'd asked to leave, was now their only hope for institutional survival. His economic power had created the leverage necessary to force comprehensive reform rather than cosmetic changes. Angela Rodriguez presented final terms for Thompson Industries' acquisition of Meridian Country Club. Complete ownership transfer, federal oversight, compliance, comprehensive staff restructuring, and transformation into a model-inclusive institution. These terms are non-negotiable. Mills realized he had no choice but to accept transformation under the authority of the man they'd discriminated against. Meridian Country Club would survive, but under new leadership that would make discrimination impossible rather than probable. As federal agents continued building their case and club finances continued collapsing, Victoria Sterling made one final desperate attempt to preserve her career by blaming others for the discriminatory treatment. Her strategy backfired spectacularly, creating additional evidence of institutional bias while demonstrating her unfitness for any leadership position. The house of cards that had protected Meridian's discriminatory practices for decades was collapsing in real time, with federal prosecutors documenting every aspect of institutional bias that had made Marcus Thompson's treatment predictable rather than surprising. By midnight, the transformation was inevitable. Marcus Thompson would own the club that had discriminated against him, and federal oversight would ensure that such discrimination never happened again. Ladies and gentlemen of Meridian Country Club, I stand before you, not as the man you asked to leave, but as your new owner. Marcus Thompson's voice carried across the marble lobby with quiet authority as he entered Meridian Country Club for the second time that evening. This entrance, however, bore no resemblance to the first. Federal agents flanked him on both sides. Angela Rodriguez carried acquisition documents bearing multiple judicial signatures, and a full legal team followed behind with the measured precision of a military operation. The transformation in the room's energy was immediate and total. Club members who had whispered about the earlier incident now stared in stunned silence as the man they'd watched being questioned and dismissed returned with complete legal and financial authority over their institution. Victoria Sterling, who had spent the previous 4 hours under federal questioning, watched from the reception area with the hollow expression of someone witnessing the complete destruction of their carefully constructed world. Her 20-year career in hospitality management had ended not with retirement planning or career advancement, but with federal investigation for civil rights violations. President Mills emerged from the executive wing looking like a man who had aged a decade in a single evening. His silver hair was disheveled, his bow tie askew, and his face carried the pallor of someone who had watched 3 centuries of institutional history collapse in real time. Mr. Thompson Mills said weakly, his voice barely audible above the shocked murmurs of club members, I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received this evening. I take full responsibility for the failures of our staff and policies. Marcus accepted the apology with the same measured composure he had maintained throughout the evening's humiliation. Mr. Mills, your apology is appreciated, but apologies don't address systematic institutional problems. Comprehensive solutions do. Angela Rodriguez stepped forward with legal documents that would reshape Meridian Country Club forever. Ladies and gentlemen, as of 11:47 p.m. this evening, Thompson Industries has assumed ownership of this institution through acquisition of controlling debt obligations. All previous management contracts are terminated immediately. The announcement hit the room like a physical force. Members who had supported the discriminatory treatment realized they were now subject to the authority of the man they had helped humiliate. The power dynamic had reversed completely in the span of 6 hours. Chad Whitman, whose privilege had protected him throughout his adult life, pushed through the crowd with desperate aggression. "This is impossible. You can't just buy a private club because your feelings got hurt." His words carried the desperation of someone watching their social world collapse, but they also demonstrated how completely he failed to understand the legal and financial forces he had helped unleash. Detective Santos stepped forward with federal authority. "Mr. Whitman, you're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to violate federal civil rights laws. You have the right to remain silent." The arrest unfolded in front of dozens of phones recording every moment for social media distribution. Chad's privilege, which had seemed unassailable hours earlier, proved worthless against federal prosecution for civil rights violations. "This is insane," Chad protested, as handcuffs clicked into place. "I didn't do anything illegal. I was just supporting club security." "Mr. Whitman," Agent Morrison replied, "supporting discriminatory security practices is conspiracy to violate civil rights. Your family's political connections won't protect you from federal prosecution." Chad's arrest sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Club members realized that supporting discrimination carried legal consequences that extended far beyond social embarrassment or membership disputes. Ronald Hayes. The security chief watched his colleague's arrest with growing terror as he realized his own situation was about to become equally dire. His background in law enforcement had taught him to recognize when cases were unwinnable, and the evidence against Meridian Country Club was overwhelming. "Mr. Hayes," Detective Santos announced, "you're also under arrest for violating federal civil rights laws under color of authority. Your background in law enforcement makes your actions particularly egregious." Hayes's arrest completed the systematic dismantling of everyone involved in Marcus Thompson's discriminatory treatment. Federal prosecutors were sending a clear message that institutional bias would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Victoria Sterling watched the arrests with the growing realization that her own federal prosecution was inevitable. Her attempts to blame others had backfired spectacularly, creating additional evidence of institutional bias while demonstrating her unfitness for any position of authority. "Ms. Sterling," Agent Morrison announced, "you'll be arrested tomorrow morning after federal prosecutors complete their review of evidence. I suggest you contact legal representation immediately." Victoria's career in hospitality management was ending with federal prosecution for civil rights violations. Her decision to question a well-dressed black man's invitation had triggered the complete destruction of her professional life. Marcus addressed the assembled crowd with the quiet authority of someone who had transformed discrimination into opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this institution will continue operating under new management, committed to inclusive excellence rather than exclusive discrimination." His speech was brief, but devastating in its implications. Meridian Country Club would survive, but under leadership that would make discrimination impossible rather than probable. Dr. Jennifer Walsh and Judge Patricia Brown stood with Marcus as he announced comprehensive reforms that would transform the institution into a model of inclusive hospitality. Their presence demonstrated how completely the club's most respected members supported fundamental change. The Federal Oversight Agreement requires comprehensive staff restructuring, bias training, and community outreach programs. Marcus continued, "This institution will become an example of how elite establishments can maintain excellence while embracing inclusion." Sarah Chen documented every moment for journalism that would define her career and provide historical record of institutional transformation. Her accidental documentation had evolved into comprehensive coverage of systematic change. Antoine Williams, the head chef who had quietly endured discrimination throughout his career, was promoted to executive management with authority over dining operations and staff development. His elevation symbolized the transformation from systematic exclusion to comprehensive inclusion. Antoine Marcus announced, "Your experience with this institution's culture makes you uniquely qualified to lead its transformation. I'm promoting you to Executive Director of Operations with full authority over staff training and customer service protocols." Antoine's promotion from discriminated employee to executive management demonstrated Marcus's commitment to elevating those who had been systematically excluded from advancement opportunities. Angela Rodriguez presented the federal oversight agreement that would govern Meridian's transformation. This institution will operate under federal monitoring for 5 years with comprehensive reporting requirements and community oversight. Discrimination of any kind will result in immediate closure. The federal oversight meant Meridian's transformation was legally enforceable rather than voluntary. Civil rights compliance would be mandatory, not optional, ensuring lasting change rather than cosmetic adjustments. Mills watched his institutional legacy transform from prestigious exclusivity to federal oversight and community accountability. His 27 years of leadership had ended with the complete restructuring of everything he had worked to preserve. Mr. Mills Marcus said with professional courtesy, "Your resignation is accepted effective immediately." Thompson Industries will assume all management responsibilities and implement comprehensive reforms starting tomorrow morning. Mills' removal completed the systematic replacement of leadership that had enabled discriminatory practices. New management would be selected based on commitment to inclusion rather than maintenance of exclusive traditions. As federal agents completed their arrests and legal teams finalized acquisition documents, Marcus Thompson stood in the marble lobby where he had been humiliated hours earlier, now holding complete authority over the institution that had discriminated against him. The climax was complete. Discrimination had been transformed into ownership, bias had become federal prosecution, and systematic exclusion had evolved into comprehensive inclusion. Meridian Country Club would survive, but as something entirely different from what it had been when the evening began. Justice had been served not through revenge or retribution, but through transformation and accountability. The man they had asked to leave had returned to ensure no one else would ever face similar treatment. Sometimes the most profound change comes not from destroying institutions, but from transforming them into what they should have been from the beginning. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Marcus Thompson stood in the same marble lobby of Meridian Country Club, but the institution around him bore little resemblance to the place that had questioned his right to belong. The transformation had been comprehensive, systematic, and undeniably successful. The morning sun streamed through newly installed stained glass windows that celebrated Chicago's diverse cultural heritage, replacing portraits of long-dead founding members with artistic representations of the city's multicultural legacy. Where once hung oil paintings of white men in military uniforms, now displayed vibrant murals depicting the contributions of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and immigrants who had built Chicago into a world-class city. The reception area, where Jennifer had once questioned Marcus's invitation, now featured a prominent display, the Meridian commitment to inclusive excellence, outlining the club's transformation from exclusive discrimination to comprehensive inclusion. Every staff member wore pins bearing the new institutional motto, "Excellence through Diversity." Antoine Williams approached Marcus with the confident stride of someone who had found his voice and his authority. 6 months earlier, he had been head chef, quietly enduring discriminatory treatment while preparing meals for people who questioned his worth. Today, he served as Executive Director of Operations, overseeing a transformed institution that celebrated rather than merely tolerated diversity. Marcus Antoine said, his voice carrying new authority. The quarterly inclusion metrics are excellent. Membership diversity has increased by 340%. Staff satisfaction scores are at record highs, and our community outreach programs are being replicated by clubs across the country. The statistics represented more than numbers. They reflected the systematic transformation of an institution from a symbol of exclusion into a model of inclusive excellence. Federal oversight had ensured compliance, but the changes had exceeded minimum requirements to create something genuinely revolutionary. Dr. Jennifer Walsh approached their conversation with the satisfied expression of someone who had witnessed justice transform into institutional progress. Her decision to speak up during Marcus's discriminatory treatment had evolved into leadership of the club's Medical Diversity Initiative, connecting healthcare professionals from underrepresented communities with mentorship and advancement opportunities. Marcus, Dr. Walsh said, "The medical community partnership has exceeded all expectations. We've facilitated over 200 mentorship connections, funded 15 scholarship programs, and created a pipeline for diverse healthcare professionals that's becoming a national model." Her work demonstrated how individual courage during moments of discrimination could evolve into systematic programs that created opportunities for entire communities. Standing up for Marcus had become standing up for comprehensive change. Sarah Chen entered the lobby with the confident bearing of someone whose career had been launched by accidental documentation of historic events. Her journalism coverage of Marcus's discriminatory treatment had earned her a Pulitzer Prize nomination and transformed her from party guest into nationally recognized civil rights reporter. Marcus Sarah announced the documentary premiere is tomorrow night, and we have confirmations from congressional representatives, civil rights leaders, and business executives from across the country. The story of Meridian's transformation is inspiring similar changes at institutions nationwide. Her documentation had evolved from viral social media posts into comprehensive journalism that was driving national conversations about institutional reform. The video evidence that had seemed so damaging to Meridian Country Club had become the foundation for widespread positive change. Judge Patricia Brown entered the lobby with judicial dignity intact, but enhanced by the satisfaction of someone who had helped create lasting institutional progress. Her federal authority had provided legal weight to discrimination allegations, but her ongoing involvement demonstrated how respected institutions could transform while maintaining excellence. "Your Honor," Marcus said with genuine respect, "how has the legal framework influenced similar reforms at other institutions?" Marcus Judge Brown replied, "The Meridian model has been cited in over 40 federal civil rights cases. Courts across the country are using our consent decree as a template for institutional transformation. Legal precedent is driving systematic change rather than just individual compliance." Her involvement had created legal frameworks that extended far beyond Meridian Country Club, establishing standards for institutional transformation that were being applied nationwide. Justice in one case was becoming justice in hundreds of similar situations. Angela Rodriguez approached with legal documents that told the story of comprehensive institutional change, measured through federal compliance metrics and community impact assessments. Her role had evolved from crisis management attorney to architect of systematic reform. Marcus Angela reported the 5-year federal oversight review shows perfect compliance with all civil rights requirements. More importantly, community impact metrics demonstrate that we've become a positive force for social change, rather than a symbol of institutional bias. Her legal expertise had transformed from defending against discrimination charges into creating frameworks for inclusive excellence. The institution that had faced federal prosecution had become a model for federal compliance. Mills, the former president, appeared in the lobby not as a defeated exile, but as someone who had learned from catastrophic failure and chosen redemption through service. His resignation from club leadership had evolved into leadership of diversity, consulting for elite institutions across the Midwest. Marcus Mills said with genuine humility, "I want to thank you again for the opportunity to learn from my failures. The consulting work has allowed me to help other institutions avoid the mistakes I made here." His transformation from enabler of discrimination to advocate for inclusion demonstrated how personal accountability could evolve into positive contribution. Learning from failure had become teaching others to succeed. Victoria Sterling was notably absent from the celebration, her career in hospitality management having ended with federal conviction for civil rights violations. Her inability to accept responsibility or learn from mistakes had resulted in professional destruction and legal consequences that followed her across state lines. Chad Whitman was also absent, serving the second year of his federal prison sentence for conspiracy to violate civil rights laws. His privilege had proved worthless against federal prosecution, and his family's political influence had been insufficient to protect him from legal consequences of institutional bias. Ronald Hayes remained incarcerated as well, his law enforcement background having made his civil rights violations particularly egregious in the eyes of federal prosecutors. His aggressive authority had evolved into federal prosecution and professional destruction. The absent figures served as reminders that discrimination carried real consequences for those who enabled or participated in institutional bias. Justice had been served not just through institutional transformation, but through individual accountability. Marcus addressed the assembled group with the quiet authority of someone who had transformed personal humiliation into systematic social progress. His presence in the marble lobby, where he had been questioned and dismissed 6 months earlier, represented more than personal vindication. It represented proof that individual dignity could drive institutional change. "Friends," Marcus began when I was asked to wait in the parking lot 6 months ago. I could have responded with anger, litigation, or public confrontation. Instead, I chose systematic transformation because lasting change requires comprehensive solutions rather than emotional reactions. His approach had proved that strategic thinking could accomplish more than immediate satisfaction. Patient planning had achieved results that lawsuits or protests might not have delivered as effectively. The federal oversight period ends next month. Marcus continued, but our commitment to inclusive excellence is permanent. This institution will continue serving as a model for how elite establishments can maintain high standards while embracing comprehensive diversity. The transformation would outlast federal requirements because it had become integral to institutional identity rather than external compliance obligation. Change had been internalized rather than imposed. Antoine stepped forward to present the annual Community Impact Report, documenting how Meridian's transformation had influenced similar changes at dozens of institutions across the country. The ripple effects extended far beyond Chicago, creating national momentum for inclusive excellence. The Meridian model has been implemented at country clubs, private schools, corporate boards, and cultural institutions in 37 states, Antoine reported. What began as one man's discriminatory treatment has become a national movement for institutional transformation. The scale of change demonstrated how individual incidents of discrimination could catalyze systematic reform when addressed strategically rather than emotionally. Marcus's experience had become a catalyst for nationwide progress. Dr. Walsh presented updates on the Medical Diversity Initiative, which had expanded beyond mentorship into research collaboration, clinical trial diversification, and healthcare equity advocacy. The program had evolved from club activity into national healthcare reform. We've documented measurable improvements in health outcomes for underserved communities through increased diversity in medical research and clinical practice, Dr. Walsh reported. Personal justice has become public health progress. Her work illustrated how individual acts of courage during discrimination incidents could evolve into systematic programs that improved entire communities' well-being. Sarah Chen announced that her documentary about Meridian's transformation would premiere simultaneously in theaters nationwide and streaming platforms, ensuring maximum distribution for lessons about institutional reform. The story would reach millions of viewers and inspire similar changes at countless institutions. The documentary includes interviews with federal prosecutors, civil rights leaders, and business executives who are implementing similar reforms, Sarah explained. Individual stories are becoming institutional blueprints for systematic change. Her journalism had evolved from crisis documentation into educational programming that would influence institutional policies for decades to come. Judge Brown presented legal analysis showing how the Meridian model was being incorporated into federal civil rights enforcement policies, making comprehensive institutional transformation the preferred remedy for systematic discrimination, rather than simple financial penalties. Federal courts are now requiring transformational remedies, rather than punitive damages, Judge Brown explained. The precedent established here is reshaping civil rights enforcement nationwide. Her judicial authority had helped create legal frameworks that prioritized systematic change over individual punishment, ensuring that discrimination cases resulted in institutional transformation rather than simple financial transfers. Angela Rodriguez presented the legal architecture that had made Meridian's transformation sustainable and replicable, creating templates that other institutions could adapt for their own reform processes. The legal innovation had become a resource for comprehensive change. Thompson Industries has created a legal reform toolkit that provides step-by-step guidance for institutional transformation, Angela announced. We're sharing our legal innovations freely to accelerate similar changes nationwide. Her legal expertise had evolved from crisis management into systematic reform architecture that was being implemented across the country. As the gathering concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey from parking lot, humiliation to institutional ownership and transformation. The experience had demonstrated that strategic response to discrimination could achieve more than emotional reaction, and that systematic change could be more powerful than individual vindication. 6 months ago, I was asked to leave this building because of assumptions about my right to belong, Marcus said in his closing remarks. Today I stand here not as someone who won a battle against discrimination, but as someone who helped transform an institution into what it should have been from the beginning. The transformation was complete, but ongoing, permanent, but still evolving. Meridian Country Club had become more than just an inclusive institution. It had become proof that systematic change was possible when individual courage met strategic thinking and federal enforcement. Outside the building, a historical marker had been installed commemorating the events of 6 months earlier. On this site, Marcus Thompson was subjected to discriminatory treatment that catalyzed nationwide reform of institutional bias. His strategic response transformed personal humiliation into systematic social progress, demonstrating that individual dignity can drive comprehensive change. The marker served as a reminder that discrimination could be transformed into opportunity, that institutional bias could evolve into inclusive excellence, and that strategic thinking could accomplish more than emotional reaction. The resolution was complete. Justice had been served through transformation rather than retribution. Systematic change had emerged from individual incident, and institutional discrimination had evolved into comprehensive inclusion. The man they had asked to leave had ensured that no one else would ever face similar treatment, and his strategic response had created national momentum for similar reforms. Meridian Country Club had become more than just another elite institution. It had become proof that systematic change was possible and that individual courage could drive comprehensive social progress when supported by strategic thinking and federal enforcement. The story ended not with victory over discrimination, but with transformation of discrimination. into opportunity for systematic progress. Marcus Thompson had demonstrated that the most profound change comes not from destroying biased institutions, but from transforming them into models of inclusive excellence that inspire similar changes nationwide. If this story of strategic transformation and economic justice inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about how individuals can drive systematic change. Marcus Thompson's journey from parking lot humiliation to institutional ownership proves that the most effective response to discrimination isn't always confrontation, but strategic thinking and economic leverage. His approach transformed one evening's bias into decades of progress for countless others. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that dignity and preparation can overcome any obstacle. Comment below with your thoughts on how strategic response compares to immediate confrontation when facing institutional discrimination. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss stories about real people creating real change through intelligence, patience, and unwavering principles. These are the stories that show us how individual courage can drive comprehensive social progress. Subscribe now and join a community that believes in transformation over destruction, strategy over emotion, and lasting change over temporary satisfaction. Because sometimes the most powerful response to being asked to leave is coming back as the owner.